Welcome to EWTN News Nightly. I'm Colleen Carroll Campbell. Tonight's top stories. The fallout from Bridgegate continues for New Jersey Governor Christie. We'll talk with a political columnist and a GOP pollster about how the scandal could impact one of America's most prominent Catholic politicians. Should a ventilator be used on someone who's brain dead? What if doing so keeps an unborn child alive? Catholic bioethicist John Haas joins us to analyze the end-of-life cases now in the national spotlight. And Pope Francis put his stamp this week on the College of Cardinals and the Vatican Bank. Our Rome correspondent has the details. Thanks for joining us. This week marks a milestone for Egypt, a vote on a new constitution. But the democratic process has come with a price: 11 lives lost to violence and national turmoil. Polling stations across the capital were heavily guarded by security personnel today following sporadic but deadly clashes on Tuesday. The country has been politically divided after a July coup that ousted former President Mohamed Morsi. On one side are supporters of Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood. On the other side are backers of the military and security forces now in control of the country. The government and the overwhelmingly pro-military media have portrayed the balloting as the key to the nation's security and stability. Supporters of same-sex marriage won a victory in court this week. On Tuesday, a federal judge struck down Oklahoma's voter-approved constitutional amendment that defines marriage as the union of a man and a woman. That amendment was passed 10 years ago with 75% voter support. The judge issued a stay to keep same-sex couples from rushing to get married while the appeals process is completed. Oklahoma Governor Mary Fallin criticized the ruling, saying, quote, "The will of the people has once again been ignored by the federal government." Abortion was center stage at the U.S. Supreme Court today. The justices heard oral arguments about a Massachusetts law that limits how close someone can stand to abortion clinics in that state. EWTN News Nightly's Jason Calvi explains the case.
I'd be breaking the law right now if I were standing in Massachusetts. That state has a buffer zone around entranceways and driveways of abortion clinics. To be legal in that state, anyone who's not working or an employee of the clinic would have to stand here, 35 feet from the entryway. It's a line that 76-year-old Eleanor McCullen can't cross without risking fines and arrest.
I want to be able to hand out my brochure to anyone that would be interested in receiving it any place.
McCullen is a pro-life activist. She spent $50,000 of her own money to buy diapers and food for mothers facing crisis pregnancies.
Women get abortions because they feel like they have no other choice, and the petitioners are simply people who want to speak to them freely on public sidewalks and say, "Are you interested in pursuing adoption? Could I help you?" Today, Catholic University of America professor Mark Rienzi brought the case of McCullen and 6 other pro-life advocates to the Supreme Court. In America, on a public sidewalk, you can't be put in prison for having a peaceful, consensual conversation, even if Planned Parenthood doesn't like what you're talking about. The president of Planned Parenthood League of Massachusetts, Marty Walls, says the law is constitutional.
It strikes that right balance between free speech and the right of our patients to be able to obtain their health care at our health centers.
Walls is a former Massachusetts state representative who was the law's lead sponsor in 2007.
The genesis is really the behavior outside of our health centers in the late 1980s and through the 1990s. We were subject to harassment and blockades.
Professor Rienzi says there are existing laws the state could use to punish harassment. If blocking the doors is the problem, that's illegal under state law, it's illegal under federal law. The state can prosecute it, the federal government can prosecute it, Planned Parenthood can prosecute it. It's very hard to believe that that bad behavior is actually happening, yet all of them have simply decided not to prosecute it. The High Court's ruling should be released later this year. Jason Calvi, EWTN News Nightly.
Supporters of New Jersey Governor Christie are hoping a recent speech will diffuse anger over his administration's role in politically motivated traffic jams. In his State of the State address on Tuesday, Christie apologized for the Bridgegate scandal, saying, quote, "Mistakes were clearly made." The speech comes nearly a week after revelations that Christie's deputy chief of staff and other aides and appointees orchestrated massive traffic jams on the Fort Lee, New Jersey end of the George Washington Bridge. The traffic snarls were an apparent attempt to punish Fort Lee's mayor for not endorsing Christie's re-election bid. Members of a state assembly panel are investigating the lane closures and Christie's knowledge of the plot. The New Jersey lawmaker leading that probe has said that if it's proven that Christie was involved, impeachment is a possibility. Joining me now to discuss Governor Christie's political future and the larger issue of how Americans weigh these political scandals is Tim Carney, senior political columnist for the Washington Examiner, and Kellyanne Conway, president and CEO of the polling company Woman Trend. Welcome to you both.
Hi.
Good to have you on the show. Tim, let's start with you. Why is this scandal resonating, making headlines, but also seems to be kind of touching a nerve among many?
Certainly within New York, New Jersey, and D.C. it is. And I think the reason is that this isn't a personal failing on the behalf of anyone in the Christie administration. It's an abuse of power is what it looks like. Maybe not by Christie, but someone in his administration used government power to go ahead and carry out something for political gain. And that, I think, makes a difference. It's not a personal failing of a politician. It's the fact that they were entrusted with public power and they abused it.
And are Americans more tough on politicians when they think it's an abuse of power as opposed to breaking marital vows, which obviously we've seen plenty of scandals like that?
I think so. We have sitting senators whose name, and David Vitter of Louisiana, his name was caught on the list of a prostitution ring as one of the clients. Now, he's basically, that's gone behind him. He suffered for a little while, but he put it behind him. That wasn't about abusing his powers as senator. That was about a personal failing. I think that's part of the difference.
And Kellyanne, you're a pollster, and you also were a senior advisor to Newt Gingrich in his most recent presidential campaign. He obviously faced his own questions about his 3 marriages. What's your opinion on which kinds of scandals Americans judge more harshly, these sort of abuse of power type versus the personal?
It's really no longer a close call. It's the abuse of power basket. And I learned that very crisply 10 years ago when I was doing a lot of work in New Jersey in the state legislative and county executive races. And it was an off-year election, 2003. 5 people who lost, Democrats and Republicans, for 4 of them, they had nepotism problems. They had hired their wife or they had given the daughter a favor. And I very quickly concluded in that election that people cared more if you hired your wife than if you had cheated on her. And it's gotten worse since. And by worse, I mean, why do we have to choose? Why aren't both at least scrutinized by voters in a way that should matter? I mean, look, I live in New Jersey, I vote in New Jersey, and I'm part of the New York media market where Eliot Spitzer is making a fool of his wife and daughters, another pro-woman Democrat who's making a fool of his own wife and daughters, parading around with his girlfriend after his prostitution scandal, after he resigned from the governorship. He's behaving this way in public because he thinks it's okay. But the abuse of power is important because it's also a lack of transparency to many voters. They don't like that either. They already feel like politics is the wizard behind the curtain and that it's inaccessible to you. And so if you're actually doing something nefarious back there, and I'm not saying that about New Jersey at all, but just generally speaking here, if you're doing something nefarious and it's non-transparent, let alone it's using taxpayer dollars, you're wasting time or you're being vindictive, that bothers people.
Now, you've argued, Kellyanne, that Governor Christie performed very well in that 2-hour press conference, you know, pretty much speaking extemporaneously. He, of course, had this State of the State speech where he addressed it again, and you've said that that was really one of his finest moments. But a lot of people are finding it hard to swallow this idea that he had no idea this was going on, and that even he had a deputy chief of staff working for him who had such a, you know, some apparently vindictive streak, and he had no inkling of that. I mean, I guess one question it raises is if you don't know what's going on in your own office, isn't that also somewhat an indictment of your leadership? How would you answer that?
I think it's a bridge too far, so to speak, for a governor's office. It's a big place, and I haven't been in my office yet today. I've had 3 meetings and this, so I hope people are doing what they're supposed to be doing, but there's just no way for me to know for sure. And I'm going to take the governor at his word that he found out about this incident when the rest of us found out last Thursday. Now, there's going to be other questions to answer. There are other investigations. If people also feel, I'm not sure you could be impeached for, canceling meetings. And I do think, part of why I'm defending the governor is because I think the left never stops. They want that last pound of flesh out of him. They want to disembowel him. They don't want to impeach him. They want to embarrass him, and they want to take him out of contention for 2016. And I think people who are attacking the governor should be aware of their morality as well as those who act on behalf of the governor.
I think one reason that Christie's particularly vulnerable, both as governor and as a presidential candidate to this sort of thing, is his presidential run, his donor base is going to be sort of New York, the party establishment. It's going to be elites, and they're people who are not going to be terribly patient of Christie if he gets caught up in moral problems. And then to govern the state, he needs the cooperation of Democrats. Now, no Democrat in New Jersey government is going to have anything to gain from going along with Christie in the way they did in the first term. So for those two reasons, he's particularly vulnerable to a scandal.
Real quickly, do you think he can survive then?
I think anytime you try to predict more than a couple months out how some little event is going to affect things, you're playing a fool's game.
Okay, well, we won't put you in that position then. Kellyanne Conway, Tim Carney, thank you both for joining me. We have to run to a break right now, but when we come back, our Rome correspondent will bring you the details of John Kerry's recent meeting at the Vatican. Stay with us. Welcome back to EWTN News Nightly. I'm Colleen Carroll Campbell. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry was in Rome this week to meet with the Vatican's top diplomat, Secretary of State Archbishop Pietro Parolin. Our Rome correspondent, Alan Holdren, has the details. Alan, what can you tell us about their meeting?
Well, it was very significant, just the fact that they met for so long. They were together for 1 hour and 40 minutes, the two secretaries were. Now, they spoke mostly about achieving a political solution and finding peace in Syria. But they also spoke about the U.S. Archbishop Parolin voiced his support for U.S. bishops and said that the Vatican backs their efforts to protect religious freedom in the United States and also conscientious objection. And afterwards, we found out about this from the comments that the Vatican spokesman made about their meeting. He said that they had talked about this, but then what we heard from Kerry afterwards was about everything but that matter. So this is what we know about the meeting, and the Vatican spokesman also said that it was fruitful and positive.
Interesting. And Alan, the Pope has also announced the names of his first class of cardinals. What do we know about them?
Well, this is Pope Francis' stamp on the College of Cardinals. This is him choosing people from the ends of the earth, from the peripheries, as he calls them, to form part of his closest advisory group, the College of Cardinals. He chose 4 Vatican officials here, 4 top Vatican officials, but he also chose 12 other people from 12 nations around the world, places like Burkina Faso in Africa or Haiti, South Korea. And he asked them in a letter to them afterwards to be humble servants, not to take it as an honor, but as a service to the church and its people. Now, we saw today also this stamp from Pope Francis himself in his efforts to bring financial transparency to the Vatican. He overhauled the Commission of Cardinals that oversee the Institute of Religious Works, the so-called Vatican Bank. And we'll see what that personal touch he's made does to bring transparency to the Vatican's finances.
Good to know. And Alan, we're also hearing a lot over here about a meeting tomorrow between Vatican officials and the UN on the protection of children. Some media reports are saying that this is going to be a grilling of Vatican officials over problems with child sexual abuse in the church. What can you tell us about the meeting?
Well, from the media reports, there's a lot of hype about this meeting. What I can say about it is that the Vatican goes to the UN to give an account of how it's protecting children every 4 years. So this is something they've done before, something they continue to do. They're going to be talking about the measures they've put in place, how they're implementing them, and they're sending some of their best to do so. And so this meeting is something that they do often enough, and we know that the day after the Vatican gives its account, that Germany will be there to do the same.
Good to know. Thanks, Alan. Well, here in the U.S., several end-of-life cases in recent days have reignited the debate about brain death. Among them is the case of 13-year-old Jahai McMath, a California girl whose complications following a tonsillectomy have rendered her brain dead in the opinion of her physicians. Doctors at Children's Hospital and Research Center in Oakland say McMath is a month overdue to be taken off life support. They say she has no hope of recovery, and a coroner has issued a death certificate. But McMath's parents say that since her heart is still beating, she's still alive. After weeks of battling in court, the parents won the right to remove their daughter from the hospital. They took her to an unnamed facility where she remains on a ventilator receiving nutrients.
Or she's there now, actually, in her new home, where she's going to be treated like the innocent little girl that she is, and not like a deceased body, the way Children's Hospital has been treating her since December 12th.
Joining me now to talk about this and other cases is Dr. John Haas, president of the National Catholic Bioethics Center. Welcome, John.
Thank you,
Good to
Colleen.
see you
It's good
again.
to be with you. Thank you.
Let's start with this larger question of brain death. What's the history here? Because this remains a controversial topic, and yet it's pretty widely accepted in the medical community and has been for decades. Is that right?
Well, not only is it widely accepted in the medical community, it's widely accepted in the church as well, or by the highest teaching authorities within the church. Traditionally, people have been judged to be dead using cardiopulmonary criteria. That is, they stop breathing, the heart stops beating, and the doctor says, you're dead. And that's been accepted for forever, you know. And, but recently, with advances in medical technology, they're able to use life support, which can actually enable systems within the body to continue functioning even after the person is dead, principally a ventilator. And the ventilator is able to keep oxygenated blood coursing through the body even after a person has died, using what are called neurological criteria, and that is when the brain is completely dead, then a doctor can judge that the person's dead.
And what does the church say about this? You said there's a long history of the church accepting brain death as legitimate death. Well,
it's relatively recently that neurological criteria have been used. I would say it started probably in the 60s, but already in the 70s, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops accepted that as legitimate. In 1985, 1989, and 2008, the Pontifical Academy for Sciences accepted neurological criteria along with cardiopulmonary criteria as being legitimate means of determining death. And in 2000, Pope John Paul II, addressing an international conference of transplant physicians, stated at the papal level that this is acceptable by church teaching.
And I think it's still confusing, though, for many lay people. Certainly, McMath's family has said, well, her heart's beating, you know? I mean, we see a living person there. How can it not be that our daughter is still alive?
That's right, but you can be deceived by appearances at times. And the reason we judge somebody to be dead using cardiopulmonary criteria is that once oxygenated blood stops flowing through the body, the brain atrophies and dies, okay? And then there's no hope whatsoever of recovery or resuscitation. Hearts have been resuscitated, but a brain has never been resuscitated. And so once somebody is determined to be dead using these neurological criteria, they're gone. There's just no hope whatsoever. And this is done applying very rigorous tests to the person that's on a ventilator. But if there's no blood flow in the brain whatsoever, in the skull, if there's no electrical activity, then we know that the brain is dead and the soul has already departed from the body.
So Catholic teaching would say that the soul departs when this neurological criteria is met, in other words, when the brain dies?
Well, or the cardiopulmonary ones.
Whichever comes first?
Whichever is being used to assess the patient, because most people can't be judged according to neurological criteria because you don't have the sophisticated technology to make those kinds of judgments. But Pope John Paul II did say that those kinds of criteria can be used, and he also pointed out that we can't know the exact moment of death. He says when death has occurred, we know that it's occurred because certain biological signs begin to indicate that the person is dead. Biological signs such as the heart stopping beating, the person stopping breathing, or no longer electrical activity within the brain or blood flow within the brain. So we know from those criteria after the person has already died that they're dead. He said you can't know at the exact moment because there are no tools that allow us to determine when an immaterial reality like the soul has actually left the body. We know it's left the body when we see that rigor mortis begins to set in, when there's no breathing or heartbeat, then we say, well, the person has died.
Now, you've debated, Dr. Paul Byrne, on this issue. Other groups like American Life Leave have come to the defense of the McMath family, saying, you know, we need to err on the side of life here. But there's also obviously a great deal of support for the hospital's position in Catholic and pro-life circles. So there seems to be a division here. What do you say to those who say, well, just in case, we got to err on the side of keeping that ventilator going? What's the harm of doing that?
Well, there can be a lot of problems with it. I mean, for one thing, it becomes an abuse of a corpse after a while. I mean, the person ought to be put to rest, and there ought to be closure for the family. You need to make another bed available in the intensive care unit, for example, if the person has died. If there's any doubt, then we don't. But the Pope said in his address to the Transplant Society, we have to have moral certitude that the person is dead, then the organs can be removed for transplantation. And in this case, there's moral certitude on the part of the physicians that have examined the body that this poor girl has died. We're not privy to the clinical facts of the case, but by all the reports that we've seen, they seem to be acting in accord with the law in all 50 states that allows for neurological criteria as well as cardiopulmonary for determining death, and as well as in conformity with Catholic Church teaching.
Quick question, we're almost out of time, but there's the case of Marlise Munoz in Texas, a woman who's been declared brain dead but has been kept on a ventilator because she's pregnant with, in hopes of saving the unborn child. The family, the husband say, you know, she's dead, let her go. But according to Texas law, apparently, you know, there can be these extraordinary measures done to try to save the life of the fetus. What would Catholic teaching say on that one, or is that too murky to have?
That's a very complex case, and frankly, not all the facts are known. I mean, sometimes people are declared brain dead when they're not brain dead, okay, when they're very close to being dead and not yet dead. The body can't sustain a pregnancy for very long after a person has died in accord with neurological criteria. If it might be sustained for a short period of time, the child is very close to viability, maybe a case can be made that the ventilator ought to be continued so that we might at least be able to save the child. But if the person has already died, then there's no requirement to continue that kind of support.
That'd be considered extraordinary measures.
What's beyond extraordinary measures? I mean, the question of extraordinary measures has to do with prolonging the dying process or keeping a person alive who's dying. If they're already dead, it's not an extraordinary measure.
Then the right thing definitely to do would be
to remove these machines, if you will, that's keeping systems within the body functioning.
Interesting. Dr. John Haas, thanks so much for joining us.
Glad to be with you.
Well, it's one of the fastest growing forms of education in America, homeschooling. According to the U.S. Department of Education, the number of children who are homeschooled has increased 75% since 1999 to nearly 2 million children. That's still less than 4% of all school children nationwide. But according to a 2012 report from Education News, the ranks of homeschoolers are growing 7 times faster than those of children in K through 12 schools. Tonight, EWTN News Nightly's Wyatt Goolsby reports on a program in Manassas, Virginia that brings Catholic homeschoolers together in a unique educational community.
Hello? Anybody home? I was there, but this was not the moon.
It's a typical Thursday for 11-year-old Addie Garrity as she presents her weekly creative writing assignment to her classmates. At first, many may not even realize this classroom of all girls in uniform is not a typical Catholic school. This facility is part of rented church space, and these students are all homeschooled. They're part of Aquinas Learning Center, a once-a-week program for grades pre-K through high school that's now being used by parents in 5 states. Rosario Riley, a mother of 5 with a master's in education, created the curriculum with other Catholic homeschooling parents in 2009. Their goal? To combine a Catholic classical foundation with the advantages of homeschooling.
Aquinas Learning is more of a family-friendly education in that if you're in kindergarten, if you're learning astronomy for science, in 6th grade you're also learning the same lesson. in science, so that if you plan to read books as a family, or if you feel like you want to go on a field trip, then we can all be on the same page and we're learning the same thing.
Council of Jerusalem.
At Aquinas, students avoid using the word teacher.
The Magna Carta.
Instead, the parents who lead classes and group activities are called mentors, since their work supplements the lessons taught by the child's primary teacher, his or her parents. The project that students like Addie work on in the classroom in such subjects as history, science, or English then translate into assignments that students can work on at home.
It's fun because when you're homeschooled, you don't have lots of friends at your house, obviously. You just have your brother and your sister, and you learn different things and make a lot of new friends.
The chance to make new friends is one reason that programs like this one are catching on. Another reason, in the case of Aquinas, is the program's emphasis on creating a Catholic educational community. Kathleen Leffis, a mother of 3, began researching homeschool programs for her daughter several years ago. She says she found lots of resources, but Aquinas Learning Center provided the outline most aligned with her family's values.
We've been drawn to teaching her from a classical perspective, and it seems to work and be a very natural approach to learning. It's something that has really enriched our instruction with her.
In Manassas, Wyatt Goolsby, EWTN News Nightly.
Joining me now to talk about the larger picture of homeschooling in America is William Estrada, Director of Federal Relations for the Homeschool Legal Defense Association. Welcome, William.
Great to be on, Colleen. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, William. And you yourself were homeschooled K through 12, oldest of 8 kids.
Absolutely.
In upstate New York, is that right?
In upstate New York,
okay.
Yes.
Well, tell us a little bit first about these hybrid models, which Wyatt just profiled this one in Manassas, but it's got branches around the country, and this seems to be something that's catching on. Why do you think that is?
It's for several reasons, Colleen. The biggest one is homeschooling parents want to make sure that their children are able to benefit from every sort of educational opportunity. They want their kids to be well socialized, to have lots of friends, to interact with people, but they also want to be able to have that parent-led, parent-guided curriculum. And it was interesting when we heard this report that they were saying the parents are the primary teachers, and they don't call them teachers, they call them mentors who come in and they assist. Something that is sometimes it's called co-ops, where the families will get together. Maybe one mom knows mathematics better than another mom. She'll teach those. But in general, the education is being done at home, and the co-ops help assist with socialization and with also kind of getting out of the house and bringing in more opportunities.
And just taking a step back and looking at the explosive growth of homeschooling just in the last decade or two, what's driving that? I mean, I know there are different reasons parents choose to homeschool, but what are some of the top factors?
You know, Colleen, the U.S. Department of Education has been conducting every 4 years. They have a study called the National Center for Education Statistics. They look at homeschooling, and the top 2 reasons are parents wanting to have moral and religious instruction for their children, and also concern that parents have in the educational environment in the public schools. And we are seeing more and more parents are, again, concerned about that educational component in the public schools, and also concerned about the lack of moral and religious instruction. And those are the 2 driving forces that the U.S. Department of Education has found for why more and more parents are choosing homeschooling.
So what about academic achievement among homeschoolers? What do you see there when you measure them against kids who are going to a public or a private school?
The academic achievement of homeschoolers is terrific. In 2009, Homeschool Legal Defense, of which I'm an attorney, we sponsored a comprehensive study on the academic achievement of homeschoolers. They looked at 11,000 homeschooled students. Homeschoolers on average score 25 to 35 percentage points higher than the average of student in a public school. And I think the reason for this, of why homeschooling is so successful academically, is because parents are able to tailor the education to their child. Every child is different, every child is unique, and when you're able to say, what does Johnny need, what does Susie need, you're really able to meet that educational need that each child has.
So how do you answer the million-dollar question, which every homeschooling parent and often the kids get, which is socialization? You know, how do I make sure that if I do this, my kid isn't going to turn out socially stunted, not know how to relate to his peers, never get a chance to play sports or be in extracurriculars?
The first time I remember that question, Colleen, I was 4 years old, and it was in the grocery store. The joke among homeschoolers is if we had a penny for every time we were asked that, we would all be millionaires. The answer is actually what we saw in that short video clip, where homeschool parents get together. There are co-ops, there are homeschool sports leagues. As we have seen the growth in homeschooling, the Department of Education now estimates there are almost 2 million homeschooled students in the United States. It's also growing internationally. Then it's much easier for parents to find a network of homeschooled students, homeschool families in the area, and it just works terrifically. I was involved in homeschool high school debate. It was a national debate league. We met hundreds, thousands of our peers and really enjoyed it.
Interesting. William Estrada, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Colleen.
Well, that's all for tonight. Be sure to tune in next week when we'll be airing a 1-hour special edition of the show dedicated to the March for Life and the future of the pro-life movement. We'll have a great lineup of pro-life leaders joining me in studio, and you won't want to miss it. In the meantime, be sure to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and check out our EWTN News Nightly YouTube page, where you can catch our entire program again. I'm Colleen Carroll Campbell, and on behalf of all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.